Why do SUVs suck and most high center of gravity vehicles? You know, here's your car. Draw the axle. I like solid axles, so there's my solid axle. Of course, all cars. The point of action is essentially around the center of the contact patch of the tire. And the car has a center of gravity, and we're not even going to think about suspension moments initially. This is the CG of the vehicle. Well, when you're cornering the vehicle, obviously the centrifugal acceleration wants to pull the CG over, and more and more of your mass, that's creating a moment, and your traction is at the ground level. That's what the car drives on. So there's your traction down here. Your CG is up there, and that makes a moment. And the harder you corner, the less weight there is on the inside tire, and the more weight there is on the outside tire. And at a certain point, the inside tire, we'll say this vehicle, we're looking from the back, it's making a left turn. Well, at a certain point, this tire will actually lift off the ground. But even before that happens, when you're in a car and you're going around a corner, well, at a certain point, all your force is over here. So all your braking, all your acceleration is coming from one side of the vehicle. And this is analogous to the limitations of a motorcycle. If all your accelerating and decelerating forces come from one side of the car, well, anytime you brake or you get on the gas in the corner, guess what? You're now yawing that car. So, we'll say this is a top view looking down, and we'll make the tires a little turning front tires. And I'd almost look at the rear tires turning too, but that wasn't supposed to be the case. But anyway, looking from your top view down, you're driving this car, you're making a left turn. Well, if all your forces are acting on these two outside tires, well, if you go to accelerate, well, what's going to happen? Your CG is here, all your forces are coming from one side, nothing's going on over here. The whole car is going to want to spin around and essentially, oversteer. But it's not even like you're trying to oversteer. You're cattywampers, one side of the car. So even if you have a limit slip differential, all limit slip differentials do, in a lot of applications, just let the car crash. Especially with drag cars, and I'll get to that in another video. Drag car suspension. But you're putting all your forces on one side, and if you go to brake, it's the same thing. If you go to brake in a corner and you're going left, the car is now going to want to steer out of the corner because you're pulling one side of the car. You're not pulling the car in the center, you're pulling the car on one side. So it's like your center of gravity is really where your forces should be acting. In a straight line, when you're not steering, it really doesn't matter, aside from weight transfer and stuff. But everything is straight in a straight line, and everything's happy. And that's part of the reason why when guys build drag cars, as a kid, I never quite understood why they were always trying to narrow the rear end. So you have these funny drag cars where literally it's like the rear wheels they sit inboard, and the rear ends are narrower and narrower. And I never understood why everyone was so into doing it. It's like, it just looks weird to me. Like, I don't get it. But now I get it. It's like the reason they're doing that is because when a drag car launches, they're all running spools. So it's like both tires are, spinning together, which in a lot of applications, actually isn't ideal. But, if your forces are more in the center of the car, even if the car, goes a little sideways on launch, you're still, driving the car much closer to the center of the car with the CG. So the car is going to want to yaw to the left or the right the same way. And, when we think motorcycles, obviously a motorcycle, the contact patch is always in the center of the motorcycle. When was the last time you saw a motorcycle in any kind of drag race do anything funny? Outside of wheelies, and that's a different thing. You never see a motorcycle launch anywhere on the street, on the track, and go sideways. It just doesn't happen. Motorcycles launch straight. Even the most violent one. Even the guys with wheelie bar bikes. And, you know, that's a little different because a wheelie bar bike, when it launches, they do funny things because they're landing on the wheelie bars. So it's like, if it launches and, you know, the weight's a little off, it can kind of point in a different direction. And then they're their own things. Those guys are as crazy as the guys that drag race, you know, Banshees. But even still, it's like, when you think about how hard those guys launch, because they're basically just rev the engine, dump the clutch, and then let it run on the front wheel. I mean, it's crazy because they're almost driving, you know, when they go up on the rear tire is almost front wheel drive with the wheelie bars hanging behind them. So it's like they almost are racing a front wheel drive vehicle that doesn't have steering. So it's like if they launch straight, they're good. If they're crooked, there's no way to correct until you get the front end down. And even though they're motorcycle tires, they're flat tires. So if they land on one side of that bike can actually drive to the left or to the right of the CG, depending on which side of that front tire they land on. Where the guys who run, you know, drag radials, you know, that look like traditional tires, you know, they're always basically in the center of the tire because the tire is a rounded profile. So, yeah, that's what sucks about, you know, high CG vehicles, you know. You know, in a perfect world, you know, all your mass would be at ground level. We're damn near close to it. And, you know, all the aids you do, even if you know, can change spring preload automatically, or you can counteract, you know, vehicle roll, because there's all these people that get, I'll do a separate video on roll centers, but it's like too many people obsess on roll centers and think that changing the roll center vehicle is a panacea for, you know, either high CG or other handling. And it's just not. You know, roll centers is this weird wonky thing that, you know, too many engineers, like the way we were, you know, when I took, you know, kinematics in college, it was, you know, the explanation of roll centers was just fucking abysmal. It was completely wrong. Didn't get the point. I don't think the majority of people I went to school with appreciated anything that was going on. I don't even think the professor really understood it. But yeah, when the vehicle rolls, about the suspension roll center, it's not the problem with having a high CG on like an SUV or something. It's not the roll center. It's not the fact that the body rolls. It's the fact that you're always putting more weight on that outside tire in the corner, and you're always, then when you go to accelerate or decelerate the vehicle, you're always going to have that big yawing moment, because it's like you've basically made a motorcycle. You made a car. You lost the advantages of having a four-wheeled car, and you're now building a four-wheeled car that has the disadvantages of a motorcycle. So, you know, it's kind of strange, you know, an SUV has, you know, falls in the same, you know, failure mode or same limitations as a, you know, a sport bike that weighs, you know, 450 pounds, but they just do. So, and that's why I don't have an SUV.